Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Welcome. Welcome to our webinar, 4 Pillars to Ship Code Faster. I will spool quickly past the disclaimers slide here for legal purposes and introduce our major speaker, who is Shaun O'Meara, a global field CTO at Mirantis. He's been designing and building enterprise technology solutions for 20 plus years, and I know him as a superior technologist, a bon vivant, and a gourmet. I'm John Jainschigg. I work in Mirantis marketing, and I sometimes do things like deploy Kubernetes on Raspberry Pis. The topic that we're talking about today circulates around what developers want. We've written down some bullets here that are kind of a summary of what we think developers want. Both of us develop software, obviously, so we have some skin in this game. And we've tried to express these ideas as simply as possible. Developers we want to deliver working products. We want to do it easily without tearing our hairs out, and crying. We want to enjoy what we do and know that what we do is strategic and important as opposed to mere toil. We want to work, of course, with all the cool stuff because we are cool. And in doing so, we want a clear and smooth route for getting code to customers. Because ultimately, as professional developers, we're all in business delivering happiness in some form to end users, be they internal, external, or the grand public. So Mirantis thinks that we can sort of encapsulate this idea talking about shipping code faster around 4 pillars. But really, the underlying pillar is subsidiary to the first 3: choice, simplicity, and security. What these things provide together, we figure, is consistency. Ultimately, if you're writing to an API or you're talking to a complex system via CLI, changes in the background, changes in the system, changes in the integration plane are painful. Having to deal with dependencies and quirks is painful. Not having one sort of singular way of dealing with whatever you're dealing with at the time, understanding also that what you're dealing with, at the time is going to be complex and probably getting more complex over time. You want to you want to do what coders have always done, which is to standardize, abstract, to use logic in creative ways to make your life less painful. So, Shaun, elaborate on this. When you and I were working on these slides, you happily threw out the initial attempt that I made to summarize these ideas and replaced it with what we see here. Talk to me about your vision of shipping code faster.
Yeah, sure. So, when we look at these pillars, when we look at simplicity, when we look at consistency, when we look at what is developers want and what do we mean by shipping code faster, and really it's fairly simple. It's a simple idea, more complex to achieve, but we want to release more often. We want to get more features out there more often, faster, with lower effort. And effort is a big part of this. Every time we have to make a change, if it's an enormously difficult and high friction challenge, then we're going to make fewer changes. But if we can make changes easily, without the uncertainty of worrying whether they're going to go through or not, or whether I can fix them quickly or not, that's where it starts to become a real challenge for us. So ultimately, what do we mean by shipping code faster? We get features in front of our users faster, which is increased customer value for our products. We can deal with bugs and security issues. We can get them resolved, which leads to greater customer trust. So when I'm building as a developer my application and my customers are seeing updates, they're seeing security issues getting fixed, They're seeing that we're aware of those issues and we can get fixes to them. It builds trust. But it also means, because I can automate everything, because I can deliver faster, I can start to experiment. I can test ideas. I can test new features, because if they don't work, I can roll them out. And that reduced friction means I can spend a lot more time on innovating these new ideas rather than worrying about how I get my products into production. And if we take that to the next level, of course, what it means is we have to change our approach. And releasing faster means, we have to take a new way of looking at the way we develop applications. So we have to take into account modern application development methodologies. We have to look at things like containers and microservices. We have to utilize cloud. And there are so many different options for cloud these days that it can be very difficult to choose. We want to automate everything, not just the application, but the whole stack that supports that application. We want to take into account ideas like immutability and infra as code, so that I can define the infrastructure, define all the components of my application, as much as I define my application through the development process. I want to be able to constantly refactor and update and take advantage of new technologies. And by doing all of this and keeping everything in one place, in one set of controls, I reduce my technical debt. I can also start to assign different roles within my application development cycle. I can have operators look after databases. I can employ specialists to look after data stores. And throughout all this, reducing the stress of building an application and producing a new product. So if we dig down into our pillars, choice is the first pillar that I think we're going to dive a little bit more deeply into. What we want is we want to ensure that you have the best possible tool for the job. And if we look at the CNCF cloud native landscape, which is up on the screen at the moment, there are so many great tools being built by so many people who specialize in producing tools in very specific spaces, and do it very, very well. And I, as a developer, want to be able to take advantage of each of those tools. I want to be able to use the best of breed tool to meet my needs so that I don't have to invent everything from scratch. I don't want somebody dictating to me which tools I can and can't use. And that's one of the underpinning points of the Kubernetes ecosystem. So if we move on, John, to the next slide. What this boils down to for us is you should be able to assemble the platforms and use the tools that you want. And this really boils down to being able to pick your costs. What can I use? What is the best tool for my job, for my business case, for my needs, and for my budget at that time, and switch it out as I need to. At the same time, there's a plethora of open source options out there. So I'm no longer getting stuck by having to manage lock-in from big proprietary single-use platforms. I have a choice at all levels. So should I wish to use a specific operating system, I have that ability to use that operating system. But at the same time, if I wish to use a specific application from the CNCF landscape, I can. I can also choose how I want to observe my environment, and much, much more. And all of this boils down to how I manage dependencies. Ultimately, managing dependencies is a strategic investment. The observability and all the code that goes around me creating an application that I'm delivering to market, it's my IP. It's what defines my application, and it's what defines my business value for the application I'm taking to market. As such, I want to reduce dependencies on items that I have no control over. I want to be able to move, as an example, across cloud providers or a different database engine quickly and easily, so that I have that choice that meets my needs as I need them and as my needs change.
Talk to me a little bit about this this notion, which is very interesting, that observability and automation are a strategic investment, and I think now that I see it, an important strategic investment in creating value and how a complex, diverse cloud landscape works kind of against that. It doesn't it force you into making multiple choices, along the same pathways, multiple toolkits or multiple code bases for tooling different provider requirements?
So ultimately, I mean, when you have multiple observability tools and you're forced to use different types of automation across multiple cloud providers, you're creating a high level of complexity that you have to manage. You're also creating a number of different lock-in paths. So once I've done that, I've now invested my time, my effort, both in creating those automations, creating that observability up front, but now I'm going to maintain them. And the more time I spend maintaining that infrastructure, the more time that I'm worried about trying to manage 5 or 6 different cloud providers, is less time spent on innovation within my own application and where my bread and butter is. On the flip side to that as well, or another part of that, is observability of how your applications are being interacted with and how they use the infrastructure actually can lead to you making good, or without the right data, bad decisions on how you build your application. And ultimately, that is why it is so important to bring that all together in one place so that I can make good decisions about the usage of my product with my web app, my user app, whatever that may be, on how I want to take that product forward, how it utilizes that infrastructure, how it is being used by my end user. And if I can consolidate all that information in one place, I'm now able to start making good decisions. If I can't, I'm investing a lot of money, a lot of time in the wrong places, which aren't leading to me being successful with my application.
So you're actually limiting your ability to optimize your own setup considered as a totality.
Correct. You're limiting your ability to
Cost
optimize, but I think what's important here is you're also limiting the amount of time and energy you have to focus on innovation within the core part of your business.
So ultimately, in fact, it sounds like too much diversity, for example, the diversity that people would encounter when they try to do anything across multi-clouds is well, it's both costly, it's costly, redundant, and fundamentally non-strategic in some respects.
Yeah.
This would seem to be a pretty powerful force urging people to take the simplest apparent path, which is just use one cloud provider.
Yeah, but at the same time, if I go down one path, I lead into that discussion around lock-in.
Yeah, you lose any control, competitive control. Yeah.
And that flexibility is also important to me, especially as I'm, as a smaller business where I don't necessarily have the buying power to demand better pricing, as an example, of a single vendor. And once I'm locked in, it's very hard to move somewhere else. It's expensive and takes a lot of time and mental effort to achieve.
It also seems to be a time when people are, when cloud providers in particular are innovating fiercely. Obviously, they're competing with one another, and a lot of them are doing interesting things. So it's almost the same as looking at. It's like a jazzed up version of looking at operating system distributions, where everybody's got a different take, and nobody's dumb. I mean, they're all those takes are pretty good, but they're quite different in some ways. And you really want some freedom to move and perhaps experiment, perhaps without committing deeply. Huh. So moving on then to, the simplicity question. Clearly, the diversity of the solutions and the components and the potential platforms that we choose it leads to this sort of countervailing pressure to create as much or maintain as much simplicity as we can, considering that our lives will be filled with complexity.
Yeah, so I mean, if we really look at it, we've spoken about what's complex, we've spoken about choice, and choice is a wonderful thing, but choice comes with challenges. And doing and achieving things in a simple way is actually quite hard. But when I want, as a developer in an organization, I don't want to have to worry about all that complexity. And if I look at all this choice, at some point I'm going to have too much choice, because I can't manage this. You know, it's just, there are too many options, and eventually I'm just going to go down one path. Well, if I can simplify that decision for you, if I can make it easier for you as a developer or me as a developer, and I can still give you the choice, but automate as much of the process of actually taking advantage of that choice, now I'm moving towards a world where I can make choices quickly and easily, but with that simplicity in mind and the simple way of addressing it and consuming it. And this is where it starts to get really interesting. So software automation, you know, whilst it's never simple, it can be simplified through abstraction, through the use of the right methodologies and the right tools. And ultimately what that does is, by giving us that great layer of abstraction to our applications and essentially handing off dealing with that complexity to another tool or to another environment, I reduce the number of people I need to handle complexity. I can start to add other toolkits. I can start to add, use, and consume other APIs, you know, and start to really consume in this multi-cloud environment. We'll see how we go from there.
The multi-cloud thing is, on the one hand, extraordinarily exciting, and on the other, actually risible in some crowds when you bring it up. Some people believe deeply that everyone should be everywhere, if only for resiliency's sake. But quite a few people, are almost saying it's crazy that it's a dream that people have, or it's something that people are selling something behind, and trying to convince others that it's a good idea, but it's never going to be really practical. I am pretty convinced, well, which is a good thing, I suppose, considering where I work, that it is a good idea. And I've become, as a result, comfortable working across multiple cloud platforms for my own personal projects and other things that I build. But I can definitely see how trying to multiply things up and do things at institutional scales could make this both daunting and costly.
Yeah. At Mirantis today, our development teams already, and have been for a while, develop products across multiple cloud platforms. We are big consumers of AWS. We're big consumers of Google. We have extensive OpenStack deployments internally, plus a number of large bare metal deployments. And we've learned a lot from that. And ultimately, we've been able to be more agile. We've been able to deliver more and faster because we have access to all these diverse environments that suit our needs. We deal, and I talk to customers on a regular basis who, for a number of great reasons, not the least of them being risk, are going multi-cloud. They have driven down that road, and it's been difficult. But it's become pretty much a modern trend and a standardized trend to spread your risk, to spread your workloads so that I can put them where it best suits me for that particular part of an application. Never mind legislative issues like GDPR in Europe and being able to store personally identifiable information only within the countries that it's created in. There are a lot of other great drivers for that. if we can simplify access to those solutions and make it easier to be consumed from an application developer point of view, where they don't need to deal with the complexity, that to me is a huge win towards simplicity. And ultimately, again, and I come back to what we were saying earlier, it's about being able to produce customer value faster. And I'm not talking about the developer's value only here. I'm talking about the end user of the application created by those developers. I think that's critical.
Mm-hmm. A lot of it, I guess, also involves moving fast to exploit, being able to move fast to exploit specific opportunities. For example, I don't know if people read blogs in the in the cloud space, in the observability space at all, but there's someone named Liz Fong Jones, originally an SRE at Google, who moved in the past year or so to a company called honeycomb.io that does very high level application performance monitoring, time series database interpretation and visualization. Very interesting stuff. And Liz has been experimenting just over the past few weeks in moving their applications, which I believe run on AWS, to ARM 64 hardware, which turns out to be harder than you'd think. Harder than you'd think, and filled with little gotchas that she had to use all of her powerful SRE skills to overcome. But having overcome some of them, she realized some pretty dramatic cost benefits for her organization. And I thought, it's this kind of thing that we want people to be able to try more, but that complexity, and maybe lack of automation is holding them back from doing efficiently. She was able to do this work in 2 or 3 weeks, which is, when you think about the complexity of, refactoring and moving, recompiling complicated software and moving it from basically one platform to another, that's not much time.
Not at all. That's extremely fast. And that is the beauty of, if I can simplify the way you access those systems, it really does make a difference. There's another area which I want to bring out, and this just occurred to me. Last night I was having a very interesting conversation with the founder of a small company here in Europe, based out of Switzerland, that does a lot of cloud native digital transformation projects. And he was talking about one of the big challenges that companies are having finding good development talent, especially here in Europe. And one of the big challenges they have is when a new developer comes into a company and they get handed, your typically badly set up corporate laptop, and then they have to try and deal with working out how to deliver their code, and it's all over complex and very difficult to do, and they have a bad experience of the process and it's over complex. How many developers very quickly move on, versus the company that delivers a brand new, as an example, MacBook Pro, and has a very simple, well set up process for a developer to sit down, quickly and easily get access to resources, quickly and easily and simply define what they require without having to learn a bunch of new complex systems. How much higher the developer retention is. So there are other big drivers around providing this simplicity over and above just the purely technical access.
So self-service applications, for example, are potentially part of the program if there's a simple way of producing self-service applications, which obviously across complex systems is a complex task, right?
Yep.
So then there's the overarching question of security, and for me, not being in any sense of the word a security pro, but obviously as a person who does and works around software, terrified of the downsides of security, it isn't the big problem that really only a very small percentage of developers actually understand security in the mathematical sense. This is not widely disseminated knowledge beyond the sort of best practice things that people learn and setting up TLS and getting certificates and installing them and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes even deeper than that. A lot of developers just are never exposed to a lot of the challenges around security. They don't even think about them. It's not that they don't necessarily understand them, it's just not part of their day-to-day jobs. They'll focus on the security within their code, but when it comes to the infrastructure that they're running that code on, SEP is somebody else's problem, which is a fairly common mentality. We've seen over the last few years some very, very high-profile attacks taken of companies where those attacks happened at an infrastructure level. And if you ask the devs about it, they would go, but that wouldn't be our problem. Well, the real reality is, though, it is their problem, because in this modern world where we're pushing everything to the cloud, where you don't necessarily have a traditional IT operations group involved who would be looking at that security, that responsibility is falling back onto developers. And it takes a lot of work. It's a high level of responsibility, because keeping up with all the challenges and everything that comes in the market about constant risk assessments and new CVEs being found in operating systems or other critical components on a daily basis, just because of the nature of how fast things are moving, which are also being fixed very quickly, it takes a lot of time and effort. And ultimately, that time and effort and that specialty knowledge required to really keep up with all these security challenges is considerable. So the more I can remove the responsibility, or rather, but still with the accountability remaining in the right place, but remove the responsibility of having to look after all that complexity by handling things like being able to do updates and upgrades and get patches in as soon as they're ready without the general pain, as well as providing that visibility across all these platforms through consolidated logging, proper log analysis, as well as even things as simple as understanding if you've had a change in the general performance of your infrastructure, which can indicate other forms of infection, then I am once again allowing a developer to really focus on what they need to focus on. Keep coming back to it, but it is an important point. Focus on producing value within their application, and ultimately helping them to reduce the overall risk of something going wrong.
It is pretty astounding when you look at container development and realize how easy it is, how many routes. It's like the Node.js problem magnified by 1,000 times. How easy it is to get layers into containers, and you can love those containers because they work, right? You layered them up yourself, and then realize that there's a CVE in some deeply buried part of that union file system that you have to get rid of. That can be a painful and scary experience. So you absolutely need apparatus to kind of help you manage that and of course all the other problems that you mentioned.
And again, that apparatus, as you say, is all about standardization, automation, consistency across all those environments, so that I know that when I do find that particular bug or that particular issue and I fix it, I can very easily and quickly replicate it across all my environments.
If you have the consistency that makes that simple, really, correct, all you should have to do is release, if necessary, a multi-platform version of the container that has the fix, and then everything should suck that container down. Well, in a perfect world.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, if I only have to release my container for one platform that will then run across these multiple platforms, because I abstract that, I'm now leaning towards this level of consistency and reducing the amount of pain I have to deal with. It's a different approach to that.
certainly does. And you can imagine, I guess, that it makes things like GitOps, which to me strikes me as like totally the way to operate everything from now on, a lot easier. You know, there are a lot fewer pull requests in an environment that's, you know, standardized or that's consistent.
Mm-hmm.
Which brings us to, aptly enough, the discussion of consistency. It seemed to us that consistency is really the goal here. You want one thing. You want you know, sort of one minimal but necessary but sufficient set of the tools and APIs and control planes that you need, so that you can have a kind of a singular experience, you know, a singular
Mm-hmm.
platform, a singular experience for everyone, regardless of the infrastructure choices and other choices that they might make. Certainly, you're allowing for people to you know, to customize their personal environments to their own taste within reason. You're not trying to dictate every choice, and you know, that can be impractical in some cases or impossible, you know, in some cases. But where consistency can be achieved, you know, the single path is, you know, is the best path.
Yep.
You wrote this slide, so I want you to read this one. This is the slide with all the singles on it.
Yeah, this is a bit of a kind of a brain dump, but ultimately what it really boils down to is, if I have a single way of building platforms across all of these infras, I think I have a single way of getting access to platforms, a single mechanism for observability and getting logging data and information, so telemetry information about these platforms, a single way of updating them, and single points of integration for all of the key components that are necessary for my application. I can take advantage of this multi-cloud sprawl where I am using the best of those components across, you know, the world, and across providers and across cost or budget constraints, by building my application only once, building my automation for my application, building my integrations for my application only once. So I can take advantage of my choice. I can pick all of those things that are necessary for me to produce the best possible quality application, without dealing with the complexity of having to make that application work across the multi-platform environment in a standardized, open way that gives me all the information I need, gives me the platforms I need when I need them for very, very low effort, ultimately bringing that simplicity in and abstracting all that complexity away. That to me is extremely powerful, and it allows me as a developer and as an application builder to focus on what I'm good at, which ultimately should be building applications that give me customer value. You know, infrastructure is plumbing. We need to give it a consistent experience, and it must just work. And that's one of the key messages here, I think.
Now, as a developer, yes, but also as someone with institutional responsibility over IT, say someone who takes, you know, who performs operations tasks or who manages operations processes regionally or globally. This is important too, isn't it? Because these single points of integration are part of the operational automation and integrated security framework that lets the business as a whole move faster around IT and deliver these services ultimately to developers. That is to say, you can get it's much easier to build a self-service interface that gives developers exactly what they want when they need it on whatever infra they happen to desire or require it. If you have the single API to automate that and the integration to corporate directory, for example, that makes it possible to have that system provisioned just for them, you know, automatically, from a single source of truth, and that work is also development and is also extraordinarily complex in environments that don't restrict, for example, the choice of cluster architecture or cloud platform or operating system or whatever.
Never mind the technical debt that all of those diverse systems brings in to try and manage them consistently. Yeah.
So that's what you're really looking for, right? Is this single seamless, experience for operations and development.
Yes. Ultimately, ops development come together to deliver a secure, safe, easy to use product that is updatable. And once they have that seamless experience, regardless of the infrastructure, regardless of the company's needs, regardless of the applications running on top of it, we bring those capabilities together and we make it easier for the devs to get the resources they need. We make it simpler and faster for the operators to create a consistent environment to run those applications on. And we give the managers, the business owners, line of business owners, the tools to get the observability and the visibility into where their applications are running, what are those applications are costing them, and being able to manage those costs by encouraging the portability across all these environments through a single seamless interface.
So implementing this in reality, this is, this is the question. If one, as we do, want to help our customers create, ship, and run their most valuable code, and also their most trivial code, but their most valuable code is obviously the most important. What are real-world options that actually provide this, this set of benefits without imposing insane constraints? A lot of people go to one cloud provider thinking that they're going to get pretty much what you've described, but then they cut themselves off from the possibility of exploiting further cloud providers or building in-house clouds. You've built a thing. I mean, you've been an important pivot and architect behind the Mirantis product offerings, Container Cloud, and more lately, the Lens and its associated stuff. What is the solution that we're proposing?
Well, we have 2 or 3 very key product lines today, led by really fantastic engineers and product leaders who've come up with these fantastic concepts. So we've got Lens, which is focused on the developer experience, providing that view, that portal, that single lens into the application environment, into what's happening on top of what your applications are doing on top of Kubernetes, and what that Kubernetes environment is doing. The other side, we've got Mirantis Container Cloud, which is bringing to operators the tools necessary to create those self-service environments, as well as providing us with those tools that reduce that multi-cloud complexity and sprawl. Those come together. Lens and Container Cloud come together to provide us that visibility and that portability. Lens will work with any Kubernetes. Container Cloud will deliver Kubernetes just about anywhere. Container Cloud, through its way of delivering new Kubernetes clusters and consuming environments and infrastructure, provides us with that security and that consistency. Through templatized deployments, standardized deployments, full stack lifecycle management, and we'll touch on some of that in a minute. And all of those together, bring us this speed and choice. I can choose what applications I want to run in my clusters. I can choose what infrastructure. I get that visibility into that infrastructure, all centered around building cloud-native applications on top of Kubernetes. And we'll talk about what Musk brings to this whole picture a little bit later on. If we really look at how do these come together for us, it's all about a cloud experience. It's about taking that ability to deliver managed infrastructure on-prem or in the public cloud, or whether it's bare metal or some private cloud solution that you have today, and giving a cloud experience across all these platforms. We're giving you self-service Kubernetes environments. We're bringing in that unified cluster operations for the operators. We're giving things like automated LCM. We're giving all that logging, monitoring, alerting, policy management, standardized images to the operators, so they've got that necessary control. But to the developers and the DevOps teams, we're giving them that self-service user interface, instant access to infrastructure that is already standardized, access to CI/CD tools, integration, pre-integration, low complexity integration to the authentication and role-based access controls. And what's really important, we're giving them visibility. We're giving both teams consistent visibility across this infrastructure. That's what Container Cloud brings us, and that's the primary focus. If we move on and into this discussion and we look at what else are we bringing in, how does this actually stack up? We speak about choice. We're saying from a tooling perspective, we're already providing a number of built-in tools. Straight out of the box, you can use them. They're pre-integrated. They make your life simpler and easier. For monitoring, we've got Prometheus. We use Jenkins for CI. We've got Grafana to visualize these environments pre-configured. We deliver Kubernetes with Helm. Make it easy. Use your Helm charts. Use standardized Helm charts to deliver applications. Items like Istio and Envoy built in. FluentD, so that we can instrument those environments and get that telemetry information. Container Cloud, obviously, is our cloud multi-cloud manager, bundles all these capabilities into a single set of APIs and UIs that allow you to have this standardized, simplified approach. And we've got Mirantis Kubernetes Engine, which is our way of delivering both Kubernetes and Swarm and managing it and providing the visibility, providing real-time updates, which is really important so that I can update and upgrade without impacting my applications. And then as we go down the stack here, we talk about the OS layer. We're providing that full lifecycle management. We're providing that choice of operating system that we see customers need. So we support Red Hat, we support Ubuntu. And then take it down to the next layer of our infrastructure. We have both the public, private, and private cloud offerings. So we're supporting AWS and others. We've got VMware and OpenStack for the private cloud offerings. So the on-prem pre-existing. And then we can deliver all of this directly to bare metal. We're seeing a big trend in the market moving towards putting Kubernetes directly on bare metal for specific workloads. Now, managing that infrastructure of bare metal is also a fairly complex task. We are taking that on and simplifying that. Manage your bare metal, put your infrastructure on bare metal, and make it simpler to consume.
This, I'm sorry.
Go on, John. Sorry.
This idea of using Kubernetes as a kind of a substrate for pretty much everything is is kind of built into the philosophy of this, this product family, isn't it?
Kubernetes is becoming the underlying engine for everything we deliver. We'll talk a little bit now, a slightly more technical diagram of how the whole thing pulls together. But Kubernetes has become the underlying API in its own right. I hesitate to call it the operating system. I hate to use terms like that, but it's become this layer between everything else that allows us to move faster, develop tools and deliver services really, really fast, because we have this consistent underlying platform to put these components on. And Kubernetes in its own right is providing us that abstraction layer across all of these infrastructures. Once again, simplifying the experience, giving us much more standardization, meaning I only have to code or prepare applications for one set of environments abstracted elsewhere. And what that boils down to is the slide we're looking at now, which is we bring developers and operators together to give them this simple experience, but it's still consistent across them. On top of these multiple platforms, we bring Lens into this to give that visibility and that access to what's actually happening inside the applications. And that whole stack gives me everything I need to know, ultimately, about what my infrastructure is doing and about how my application is running on top of that infrastructure. And the next thing, of course, is security. And we've spoken a bit about security, but what I want to highlight is security is a key and critical component to everything we do. If we don't put the effort in and the focus on security, nothing else really matters. And as such, security is seen as a first-class citizen to how we design and build these systems from the get-go. Never mind that we've got a number of additional strong features, with MSR, Mirantis Secure Registry. We've got the secure end-to-end supply chain for container delivery. We've got encryption. We're validated with the FIPS 140-2 standards. We're working on 140-3, which is the new standards. We've got the DISA-STIG certifications. We also have a proven track record with security here. We're running these products in large financial companies where we're subject to heavy auditing, as well as within a number of government organizations, which really do take a lot of care around these security components. And it's all about the layers of security, and everything from the image all the way right out to the edge of the network and the components, providing it within layers. So if we have a look at what the product actually looks like, and the stack. So if I start at the bottom of this diagram, just for the purposes, we're supporting, and I've made mention of this, bare metal, public and private cloud. We're providing you a choice of operating systems. So we give you stick to that choice at all levels. On the far left, we've got Mirantis Container Cloud. And as part of Container Cloud, we deliver the LCM for the operating systems. We deliver the LCM for the MKE, Mirantis Kubernetes Engine, plus the AAA integration, so that we can have all that RBAC, all that corporate authentication built in, and then all the multi-cloud management. Underpinning all of this is our container runtime, on top of which we put MKE, which provides for the Kubernetes and Swarm layers. We then run everything else technically on top of those two layers. So even the software-defined storage and Stacklight runs on top of those layers. The software-defined storage and Stacklight are bundled with Container Cloud, so we can ensure that you have that visibility into your environment. The software-defined storage allows us to create that underlying persistent storage necessary. And then optionally, we offer Mirantis Secure Registry on top, as well as Mirantis OpenStack. So for customers who have large bare metal systems and want to carve up and provide virtualization within their environments, we've taken OpenStack and we offer OpenStack as an add-on service on top of that, which runs as a Kubernetes application. This entire platform is our cloud-native platform. And as a customer, this is the platform that gives you all of the choice, gives us that simplicity, brings in the security, and provides for all that visibility and that view of our entire environment. Don't know what else to really add here at this point.
So with that, we would much appreciate and are standing by to answer any questions that you folks may have. And thank you very, very much for attending. And we will go to the mics and to see what people are interested in learning.
Fantastic. Thank you very much.
Okay, so we have some questions coming in. The first one I think is already answered, which is where the right tool for the job slide came from. That's the CNCF cloud native landscape image, which is a really fascinating thing that can be gotten at the CNCF IO website. So Shaun, questions. Does Mirantis Container Cloud actually manage public cloud infrastructure underneath Kubernetes, and how does that work?
So yes, it does. How does it work? We interact with the public cloud systems APIs. So it's part of the built-in Pro service, which is based on the cluster API, or loosely based on the cluster API, as part of the core components of Container Cloud. So when deploying a new child cluster, which is what we refer to as the managed MKE clusters, we'll address the APIs. We have to provide the credentials, but we'll address the APIs for example, for AWS, and we'll request all the necessary resources to do that deployment. And then, for the full life cycle, including, the eventual deletion of that cluster, all is handled from Container Cloud.
So it sounds like it's possible to deploy clusters, maybe scale them up and down over time, and then remove them cleanly without, just as a personal AWS user, one of the problems I've had with complex software on AWS is that stuff gets built and then it never gets torn down, that people's deployers are not, deterministic and complete and what's that word we like to, not immutable, but the other word, idempotent,
Yeah, so because everything we're doing is based on Kubernetes standards and norms, and because everything is stored within the Kubernetes CRDs, we have the information for every component that is built. So I could even potentially go into AWS, again, I'm using that as an example, same for OpenStack. And if I removed a element, so let's say it could be a load balancer or even a VM by mistake, what would happen is Container Cloud will rebuild that for you.
Kidding me? That really works?
It does.
Whoa. I had no, geez, and I've built how many of these things? I had no idea that did that. One of the other things that I noticed in digging around in MCC, I'm sorry, these are my questions now, was that deploying in MCC is very simple, and that the deployment system for MCC on AWS creates its own users to proceed with a deployment. That is, it requires administrative privilege only initially to sort of, get access to what it needs in the environment to proceed, but then steps down its own permissions and works under new accounts that are constrained. Is that, true of other cloud providers, for example? Does it have this sort of hierarchical idea of minimal permissioning, for increased security and access control?
So from the absolute get-go, from deploying the first management cluster, one of the very first items we do is set the correct access and security policy within the cloud provider. So whether it's AWS, OpenStack, or one of the others, to request the bare minimum access we need to manage the environment. So that's the very first step. Thereafter, when I create users and when I create consumers, whether I link it to my SSO,
I could be using a Google SSO or my Active Directory solution. I can then pull through all that RBAC information and that user information. So, in this particular case, I'd be pulling through user and group information, maybe some hierarchical information for the OU, and then assign role-based access that is aligned to that group or OU information. Thereby, for example, I could create a child cluster where I delegate access to one or two colleagues, so they have full access. But I could also then, for example, provide very limited access, just, for example, to see the state of the cluster to another group of colleagues. So I can create those appropriate separations of duty, which are very necessary, in our modern world where there are different needs. So yes, very much so.
This must be very reassuring to people who have to administer, a system that could get up to hundreds of individual clusters pretty rapidly in a large organization.
And it removes the risk factor whereby people who maybe are not trained or uneducated on the system can still have visibility, but don't have to worry about doing the wrong thing.
The permissioning system then. This may sound like a very dumb question, but it's something that has reoccurred to me. If you are fully integrated up into corporate directory and someone leaves an organization and you deprovision them from corporate directory, is that information derived down into MCC and child clusters? So in fact, their access to their personal Kubernetes is revoked, like Absolutely. In the same motion as, wow, geez, nice piece of software there. I think, in fact, that we are at the end of the hour. So if there are other questions, I think what we're going to do is publish a blog that answers them. Mm-hmm. But I want to thank everyone for attending. And if you have further questions, they can be addressed to me, John, at Jainschigg at Mirantis.com. I also encourage people to try these things out. In particular, Lens, which if you have a Kubernetes already, takes only 5 minutes to try out and provides that iterative, high visualization, high touch IDE experience for any kind of Kubernetes, and Mirantis Container Cloud, which can be POC'd very easily on OpenStack or AWS. So thank you all, and thank you, Shaun.
Thank you, John.
And I guess that's a wrap.
Great. Thanks, everybody. Have a good day.